Hello again, and in this video I'm going to go through VF Corp's Porter's 5 force analysis. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the 5 forces, and then I'm going to narrow it down and talk about the VF Corp and the fashion industry, clothing industry, its 5 forces. So the first force is competitive rivalry. Competitive rivalry deals with the rivals in the industry, and in the fashion industry this is incredibly high. So for VF Corp, their competitive rivalry is a very high intensity because there's so many rivals in their industry. But nowadays, companies place a big emphasis on brand value, and consumers place a big emphasis on brand value. So this gives an advantage for the companies that have been around for a very long time, like VF Corp has. So they've had a lot of time to build their brand value. So even though this is a high intensity force in the fashion industry, clothing industry, VF Corp is able to have a competitive advantage over other companies who have just started because of how well they've built their brand image over their history. So the next force I'd like to talk about is the threat of substitutes. This deals with exactly what it sounds like, the threat of being substituted. So for VF Corp, their substitutes are Under Armour and Lululemon. Very high intensity force in the clothing fashion industry, and especially for VF Corp, because there's so many substitutes in the industry. So that's what this force deals with. So the next force I'd like to talk about is the threat of new entrants. This deals with how easily it is for a new company to join the industry. So for VF Corp's sake, we're talking about how easily it is for a company to join the fashion industry, the clothing industry. It's a very easy industry to join because of the minimal to no starting costs, because of things like print on demand. So print on demand is when a company uses like a third-party logistics to print and ship their shirts. So people can start clothing companies with no capital tied up in inventory. They just simply click a few buttons and put out a website, and when a consumer goes and purchases it, the person who started the website never sees the article of clothing. It just simply goes to their consumer, their buyer's house. So they have little to no starting costs, and with social media, it's very easy to start and market your brand and build that brand value, because the only cost comes in social media from creating ads if you have another person do it, and buying ads through Meta like Instagram and Facebook ads to reach many people. Like I said previously, in competitive rivalry, companies and consumers place a large emphasis on brand value. So this gives an advantage for the companies who have been around for a long time. So this lowers the threat of new entrants, because even though the companies are in the industry, they're not directly competing with VF Corp because of the emphasis that companies and consumers place on brand. Because it's such an oversaturated market, and even though it's very easy to join the industry, this is still a medium intensity force for VF Corp because they are such a large company and have built their brand value over a long period of time. The next force I'd like to talk about is supplier power. Suppliers have very little power in this clothing industry, and I have witnessed this firsthand because I own my own clothing company. So I can go around, and I've looked at overseas manufacturers in the US, and screen printers in the US, and these people have very little power because there's so many of them over the course of the whole world. So I am able to negotiate the price because they have such little power, but also switch if I'm not happy with one, like a screen printer in my area. I can easily switch to a screen printer just down the road. So this allows for very little power, supplier power in the industry. VF Corp sources most of their clothing through third world countries because it's so much cheaper. Even though New Balance isn't a part of VF Corp, I'm just going to give them as an example. So New Balance only makes their high quality retro running shoes in the US because it's so much more expensive to make them in the US versus overseas. And this is the same for clothing and fast fashion. It's much cheaper for VF Corp to go overseas and manufacture overseas and ship it to the US or around the world, instead of making it in the US and distributing it that way. Another reason why suppliers have such little power in the industry is because they have little to no say over the fashion industry. So VF Corp is the one who designs it, sends it in, and the supplier, the manufacturer, must make it exactly to the guidelines of VF Corp. Suppliers or manufacturers don't have any say over what materials, what look of the article of clothing that they're making for VF Corp. And like I said, with my experience, manufacturers are easily swapped out. It's not difficult for me or VF Corp to say, no, this is too expensive, too low quality. I'm going to switch to a manufacturer, because there's so many manufacturers everywhere that it's very easy to find a new one. It's so much cheaper to go to third world countries because of the global development is so low there that the input prices for the products will continue to stay low until global development increases in those third world countries. The last force I'd like to talk about is buyer power. When I say buyer, I'm talking about companies that can sell VF goods, while I'm also talking about consumers who purchase directly from VF Corp and the companies that VF Corp owns, and they purchase their products directly. So there are many buyers in this industry. In the fast fashion industry, buyers are extremely price sensitive. This is why they hold such a high power in the industry. They're extremely sensitive to changes in price, while they can go online to companies in China who sell products directly. Also, another reason why buyers have such a high power is because of the low switching cost for clothing. So let me give a phone for example. If you go to the store and buy an iPhone, you use it for a few years, and then you want to switch to an Android, there's going to be a high switching cost there, because you might not get all your photos, you might not get all your context, and it might not be completely compatible to switch everything over. So there's a high switching cost there. But for clothing, there's a low switching cost. The only switching cost for clothing is waking up the next morning and putting a new shirt on. So clothing has such a low switching cost, and the buyers are so price sensitive that it's very easy for buyers to switch and not buy VF Corp's products, which makes power that they hold very high. Thank you.